lot of people don't want to put out their phone numbers and emails to people they really know.
Legion-based
Good evening, Iris. It's getting a little cooler in here. It's getting.
Good evening. Let's start our meeting this evening. We'll open our hearing for our annual budget, fiscal year 22 budget and proposed fiscal year 23 budget. The hearing is now open. The budget will be further discussed under new business. However, as per statute, we are required to have this hearing, and so I would invite any public comment on the budget specifically at this time. Mr. Peterson.
I don't have a copy of the budget. So I can't see what questions that.
Okay, I believe it was published along with the other records on our website, correct?
It's on the website.
Published on what, I'm sorry.
The website, on our website with
I don't have
the,
it. That's why I was asking.
Are there any other comments on the budget?
Council has published their stuff in the newspaper. If you have to publish it for Joe to publish to the others.
It is published on our website as well as the hearing is advertised there.
Does that disadvantage, we don't have years
and as part of any public practice request, a request can be made prior to the meeting to review or have any materials printed out for them.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, there were two legal advertisements. They statutorily are required to run 1 week before the budget hearing in this meeting. There was one for the amended budget that stated that we had 3 funds that we would be increasing: food service, student activities, and the rec fund. And then the proposed budget also was listed in a separate legal that running the week before as statutorily required, showing the general fund at $32,674,128, special revenue at $7,008,797, major maintenance $1,850,000, capital construction $375,000, food service $1,170,000, agency funds $1,222,207 for a total of $44,300,132. And that ran, it was only required to run once, but it ran twice to statutorily required in the Torrance Telegram.
Any further comment? Again, there'll be further discussion amongst the board during our new business. Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing and call the regular meeting of the Goshen County School District Board of Trustees to order. Would you please rise with me in the pledge of allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Adjustments to the agenda.
There are no adjustments.
Being no adjustments to the agenda, I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt the agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We'll move then to item C on our agenda this evening, which will begin with reports by student representatives to the board, which.
No, they didn't have an
They didn't
assignment this month.
All right, sounds good. You're not on the hot seat this evening. All right. And then we'll move to annual recognition of developmental delay classification. Page 5.
So this is an annual identification that matches the regulations and requirements of the consolidated grant. Each district is required to determine annually if the developmental delay disability classification will be used and information to be shared with the board of trustees. It is the intent of the Goshen County School District to utilize this classification for the 22-23 school year. This
Thank you. With that, we'll move to item 3 on our agenda this evening, which is a presentation by Ms. Hollywood and Mr. Jeffrey Fuller on Title IX processes.
Good evening, Board of Trustees and Mr. Kramer and Chairman Zach. It's good to see all of you tonight. Thank you for allowing us to visit with you tonight. Before I start my presentation, the first thing I would like to say is we will be, am I muted? The mic's on. Brian, am I muted? Okay. I just want to. So just to let all of you know that comments open for the 2021 grade today. So here we will be coming back to you likely with changes that are occurring within Title IX. For this academic year, we are in the 2020 regs, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that and the impact to the schools. So what will happen in 2023 is right now, higher education, Title IX, and K-12 Title IX are held to the same standards. That will change a little bit, be adjusted, there will be some differences between still the same process, a little different handling method for higher ed and K-12. So we have until, Mr. Kramer and I have until September 12th to submit comments through the 6th month, which is our national. Mr. Kramer and I are both Title IX trained coordinators. We've had extensive training. Oh, sorry, Mr. Fuller. Mr. Kramer will soon be a trained investigator this fall. So Mr. Fuller and I are thoroughly trained Title IX coordinators. That's part of regulation, is that you have one coordinator who is well trained on Title IX processes. It's recommended that you have 2 coordinators, 1 female and 1 male coordinator. That's not always the case. Goshen County well ahead of the curve to have 2 Title IX coordinators. Our presentation tonight is not a lengthy one. I'm going to do the first half, which is the who, what, when, and why Title IX, and then Mr. Fuller would take over and talk of the ramifications for schools and how we do it. And so we'll talk a little more about that. I'm going to take a minute with technology and share my screen. There we go. So first of all, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history and the implementation of Title IX. Title IX was signed into law in 1972. It affected higher ed at that time. In 2020, under President Donald Trump and Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, they expanded it to K-12. At that time, we didn't make any changes between what we see in higher ed and what was at the K-12. So the processes, as I explained earlier, are the same both for higher education and for K-12. It's likely with the approval of the 2022 regs that will change slightly.
Ms.
So-
Laura,
Yes.
so to just be clear, the Title IX is Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, correct?
It is the Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. It was signed into law primarily to protect athletes and mainly women athletes. It was equity in athletics at the higher ed so that women could participate in higher ed sports. Over time, it has been expanded to include sexual harassment, stalking, and victims of domestic violence. One of the things that the scope of coverage is very important for those of us who are Title IX coordinators. As you can tell, there is a large group of people. In the end, it encompasses all employees and all students that are participating in education programs. It is also pertinent to any education institution that receives federal funds. So the types of sexual harassment, Title IX has several. They are well defined and well within the scope. As Title IX coordinators, when a claim comes to us, the first thing we do is determine if it falls under a Title IX violation, if the act, the Title IX violation. In that is quid pro quo. That would be any employee and a student, anyone that is in a position of authority to exert authority over another individual. It encompasses sexual violence, which includes rape, incest, any of those instances of penetration. Sexual assault is directed at another person. Domestic or intimate partner. One of the things that the 2022 regs will expand is the definition of domestic partner and also include parents of children. That will be expanded slightly. And then stalking. In all instances, anything that would cause emotional distress is determined stalking. One thing, as I mentioned earlier, especially for Mr. Fuller and I, not all of the sex-based behavior may rise to the level of discrimination. Yes, thank you. An example of that would be offensive language. You say horrible, terrible things, and it very, very seldom rises to the level of what we call the sexual harassment. Why Title IX knowledge is important. As a public school district, most school districts, most instances, we are shielded from libel action. However, Title IX is not the case. The statute, it says that any federally funded educational program can be used for a lawsuit. So our role as coordinators in all instances is primarily to protect the victim and to provide remediation for them and to provide protective measures if necessary. But then ultimately, and also of importance to us, is to protect the institution from lawsuits. So what does the district need to know? The district receives federal funds and therefore must comply with Title IX. Educational program or activity includes location, event, or circumstances in any case in which the institution has control over. That is playing fields, football fields, that is buses, anywhere where an educational activity is occurring. Those are the places that schools must be aware of Title IX and how it affects them. Title IX provides protection between students, between employees and students, and between the district in its capacity as an employer of its employees and others who would otherwise receive benefit from our program. One of the things that we know that 2022 regs will also expand is rights of pregnant and nursing and employees. So that's something that will be expanded and likely something that will impact public school and institutions across. And I believe this is where it comes.
So one of the things that the district has the responsibility to do is make sure that we do not ignore, some people say sweep under the carpet, whatever your term is, any claims of sexual harassment or any other types of claims that fall under Title IX. Right now, most school districts are not being sued for ignoring claims or complaints. I'll go into a little bit later on what exactly districts are being sued over and why this is still such a serious issue. We do have to respond promptly. Typically, that means we need to get something going within about 60 days of any type of complaint. We're trying to make sure that we're doing that in less time. We actually have training set up this September and October where we're inviting other school districts to come and join the same trainings that our administrators have so that we can interchange with other districts whenever we have the need for investigators. In addition to that, we have to make sure that we are following all the rules and regulations for Title IX. And that'll come into one of the things that is getting school districts in trouble. So right now we're operating, as Mrs. Laura said, under what were the final 2020 regs, which were implemented from the previous presidential administration. And so what that means is that most of those regulations are going to be unchanged. We're going to have a few things that are going to ease the burden a little bit on K-12 schools, not a lot though. One of the things that is required is that employees are able to reach either one of us at any time, including non-business hours, to report any type of a Title IX potential claim. And I want to stress the word potential because a lot of times when we get a notice that there is something going on, we have to talk to the potential complainant to make some determinations. There's some initial questions we have to ask to determine, is this possibly covered under Title IX? The thing about it is that if an employee of our district is aware of a situation that could potentially be Title IX, our district knows about it. That's what the courts have held. And so one of the things we did this last school year is I went around and talked to all of our employees about the need to inform supervisors so that supervisors could call one of us right away, because that will get us in trouble. If an employee knows about something and doesn't say anything to somebody for a week or 2 weeks, we could get into trouble for that. So that's something we'll do some additional training on at the beginning of this school year to make sure employees know it's not your job to determine if it's Title IX. It's not your job to make any type of judgment. Just report what you know to be facts to your supervisor. Your supervisor will call one of the two of us and we'll start looking into the situation. So this is kind of a generic flow chart. In a little bit, we'll go over the flow chart that we designed specifically for our school district. And this just shows some of the different things that go into Title IX, whether they're formal or not in terms of investigations. So if something is determined to be a Title IX issue, the complainant, which is the person making the allegation, has the right to say, okay, I either want to file a formal complaint or I just want school discipline to handle this. If they file a formal complaint, they can, instead of having a full formal investigation, request mediation. And in that case, we would want someone who is unbiased to be the mediator in that situation. If they decide we want to let school discipline handle this, then it goes back to the administrator of the building. It does not give up their right to file a Title IX claim in the future if this kind of behavior continues. And so that's the thing about it is that there are some open-ended pieces to Title IX. That's just the way the law is written right now. If there is a formal complaint, we bring in an outside investigator, and we do that to eliminate bias. So this is somebody that does not live or work in Goshen County. If it goes to a formal investigation, there will be a report written. There's periods of time built into once the interviews are done and once the report is written for all parties to the complaint to review and make comments. In addition to that, then after that decision is rendered, there are very limited options for appeal. And typically decisions are, on recommendation of our council, are made by other council that we hire within the state of Wyoming, again, not in Goshen County, not in Torrington. And those decisions, as I said, can only be appealed on a very limited basis. And this is just kind of a general, kind of a stair step again of I was just talking about. If there's an investigation, a formal investigation, we have to formally notify all parties, the complainants and the respondents. Typically, what we have to do is include 2 respondents. Those are the people that are alleged to have done something that might violate Title IX rights. We typically put in there what the complainant says. And so that's something that they have the right to know. And then after the interviews are done, all the interview notes are sent to all parties, and all parties have the right to inspect those interview notes. The reason for that is, say for example, one witness says, oh, Carlos, he was on the bus, he saw everything that happened that day. And Carlos's parents look at that and say, no, wait a minute, Carlos was absent that day. And so then they can come back and say, hey, our son wasn't even on the bus that day. There's no way he could know anything about this. So that's one of the reasons why all witness statements are provided to all parties. After 10 days, then a informal draft of the investigative report is written. All parties then have another 10 days to review that investigative report. At that point, they have, during that 10-day period, the opportunity to provide a written statement that has to be attached to that investigative report, and we are not allowed to make any changes in that statement. At that point, then, the investigative report and any statements from participants are forwarded to the decision maker. And again, that's somebody typically that we will hire here in Wyoming. It's an attorney who's well-versed in Title IX law. And then once that decision is made, there can be an appeal, but only on 2 bases. And that is, if there is bias. You heard me talk about we don't use people within Goshen County. That's the reason, is we don't want somebody saying, oh, well, yeah, you guys had Justin deciding this. Well, Justin's kid, he's good friends with the complainant, so that's why you decided in the complainant's favor. And so that's how we eliminate that. Then the only other thing that a person can appeal on is if we did not follow the Title IX process correctly. That's why Mrs. Laura and I keep extensive records. We keep copies of all the letters we send out. We keep copies of communications that we have with those folks so that we can prove we follow the process according to the way the law allows for. And so and then if the appeal is issued, then that's it. If it goes to an appeal and the appeal maker makes the decision, then that's it. That's the end of the line for that. I do want to say, if someone under the initial decision is found to have violated somebody else's Title IX rights, and it's a student-on-student type thing, then that comes back to the building administrator and Mr. Kramer to make decisions about discipline. That's why building administrators and Mr. Kramer are not involved in any of this process, so that they don't have any pre-existing bias on each case. Now, I will tell you that the one thing that's getting school districts in trouble right now is ignoring bias and retaliation, which I'll talk about in just a little while. And so if school districts ignore bias issues, they are getting sued over it right now. This is just another way to kind of look at this. Again, I won't go through all this again. It just shows all those different pieces. These are just general charts. As I mentioned, we do have a district one that we have developed, and it's been approved by Scott Kopicki, our attorney. One of the things we will do is in the future, whenever we advise someone of their Title IX rights, whether that's complainants or respondents, we not only will give them a copy of our updated policy, but we'll also give them a copy of this flow chart of these 2 pages so that they have a little bit more visual way to look at how the process is going to work. So I talked about if someone's found to have violated Title IX rights, that comes back to the superintendent, the administrator. If there were a recommendation for expulsion, obviously that has to come back to you folks on the board to consider that. You know, it could be, I mean, the range of options there really run a whole gamut from, okay, we already did some school discipline, we'll do some additional, all the way up to and including suspension. And so some of the other things that we have to make sure we're doing is that Title IX training has to be given to all of our administrators and staff every year on a consistent basis. This year earlier, we did have a training session just with our principals that our attorney came down and did for us. It was a day-long training on Title IX. Mrs. Laura and I have both attended Title IX training from the Association of Title IX Administrators, which is often referred to as the TICSA. So we both had that. This fall, the training we've got set up for all of our principals and what we've invited other districts to attend is also from a TICSA. And what our attorney has told us is that this particular organization is the gold standard of training for Title IX issues. And so that's why we've selected them to come in. Some other things, we talked about the issue of bias. We talked about confidentiality a little bit. There are times where we will, depending on where we're at, contact law enforcement. Here in Torrington, the police chief has asked us if we suspect any type of criminality that we notify them of that. We cannot provide any interview notes to them unless they have a warrant for that. They are willing to provide us with information. We just have to, before we can provide anything, have to have something legally binding to do that. Now, I mentioned the other thing that's getting school districts into trouble, and that's called retaliation. Once somebody's filed a claim, if either person, complainant or respondent, starts sending any kind of communication, it could be written through social media, through friend of a friend type thing, that causes the other person to feel like they are being, I guess, kind of pushed into not moving forward with the case, that's called retaliation. And that is the one thing that school districts are really getting in trouble on right now. In fact, last fall, a retaliation case was opened by the Office of Civil Rights down in Denver. They opened it in Carbon County 1 in Rollins. And it was, the gist of it is that the allegation is that Carbon 1 did not respond to a retaliation correctly. And so that's one of the big things when we talk to folks and we advise about Title IX rights. We really make sure they understand, do not communicate with the other person right now, because anything you say could be taken out of context. And in Title IX, as coordinators, we can file a complaint if we feel it's necessary. Most of the time, we try to let parents make that decision. If there is a retaliation allegation, though, typically we will file a complaint on that ourselves, because we want to make sure we're protecting the rights of both parties. And that's part of the emphasis of Title IX law, is to make sure that everybody's rights are protected, that we're following this in a systemic and documented process, and that everybody's being treated fairly. So one of the things we've said to employees is that if you see something, say something. Even if you're not sure, don't worry about it, just report facts to your supervisor. You know, employees are not qualified to say, well, this person sexually assaulted that person. I mean, that's just not a fact. Just report to what you saw factually to your supervisor. If you get secondhand comments, just report, so-and-so told me that so-and-so said this, because that's what was reported to you. And so then we will take over and figure out, is this something that applies to Title IX?
One of the things that I'd like to add is if we report evidence to law enforcement and there is a law enforcement investigation, Title IX can continue independently of law enforcement allegations. So there is a possibility that two separate incidents, the same incident, may be investigated two different ways, and they can run simultaneously at the same time. One does not have to completely with it.
Right, and actually, Title IX and law enforcement investigations are in separate silos. And so law enforcement may tell us, we don't want you to move forward with this. We don't have a choice. This is a federal law. And so we can't stop that investigation, because again, any type of consequences from a Title IX investigation are not criminal in nature. That's up to law enforcement to make that determination. Our consequences are school-based. Now, one other thing that had come up this year is that principals want to know, well, so are you telling me if something is possibly Title IX, I can't do anything? The answer to that is no. If the conduct violates any part of our school discipline policies, administrators can give consequences right away. What they have to make sure of is that they are only talking about this behavior violates this part of our code of conduct. They cannot say, you're getting this consequence because you might have violated Title IX. No consequences because of a Title IX issue can be handed out unless someone is ruled to have violated somebody else's Title IX rights. At the same time, though, a lot of times the behaviors that get reported to us fall under both areas. And so if there's something that falls under our school discipline and conduct codes, there can be consequences enforced for that. It just has to be very clear that this is what the consequences are for. And we typically tell our administrators, don't even talk about Title IX. Just talk about what are the consequences, what part of your behavior or code of conduct are you referencing for those consequences. Any questions? I'll take questions.
Questions from the audience?
Purple board questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This concludes our Title IX presentation. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Move to item D on our agenda this evening, which is public forum. Just as a reminder, there is a 5-minute time limit to your comments this evening. We do have about 10 or 12 here this evening, so we'll proceed forward here. Just as a reminder, there is limited interaction that occurs during this portion of the meeting between you and the board. And I believe if there's anybody else that would like to speak, please turn your slip into the Fritzler. We'll begin this evening. I just put them in alphabetical order, and so we'll begin with Ms. Coburn.
I'd like to speak late.
We'll move to Mr. Dovey.
Thank you, Board. It's my understanding that there was a new business item added to the agenda for this meeting, and that new business item was that you were going to consider changing the protected classes regarding your discrimination policy beyond the ones that are already established in law to include sexual orientation and gender identity. That's why I'm speaking. It's my understanding that that was put in as a new business item on the agenda. I've spoken to this issue before in several forums at EWC, at the state legislature, and just want to remind the board that in Wyoming, the state legislature has authority over what the protected classes are. The school board does not have authority over that. I think if the school board made sexual orientation and gender identity a protected class, that's what we call in the law ultra vires, beyond your authority to do that. Right now, there is not a federal statute. Congress has not passed a federal statute that adds sexual orientation or gender identity to the list of protected classes like age, race, religion, and so on. There's not a federal statute that does that. There is not a state statute that adds those to the protected classes. Okay? There is not one. There's issues down at the state legislature that come up from time to time, and the state legislature has never passed that. I noticed in the proposed new business rule, I guess, or policy, it talks about the USDA, sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination. That's a big item in the news. You have a current sitting superintendent of public instruction, Brian Schroeder, has come out against that in saying that the state of Wyoming and the local school board should not go along with what he's calling blackmail to get funding for low-income students. The federal government, this is his words, not mine, is blackmailing the districts to have them implement sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes in order to receive that funding. You have 26 state attorney generals, including Wyoming. As everyone knows, there are 50 states, 26 is more than half of the states. They haven't filed a lawsuit that I'm aware of yet, but they have sent a combined letter of 26 states to push back against the USDA and the Biden administration on this policy. So that's currently pending. I know the proponents of this sexual orientation and gender identity use a case that came out of the United States Supreme Court in 2020 called the Bostock case. That was a case that was limited to Title VII and private employment. There hasn't been a subsequent Supreme Court case about Title VII and sexual orientation and gender identity as a protected status, but that was private employment. The proponents would like to expand that to every possibility in the nation, and that's not been the case. That hasn't worked its way through the courts. I think that doing this is a very radical act. This is a conservative state, as this board knows. It's a conservative governor, it's a conservative legislature, it's a conservative attorney general. And there's no one in the state, at the state level, and no one at the legislative level who's in support of this, including the superintendent of public instruction. So I'd say if the court moves it forward with that policy, it's an ultra virus act. It could set itself up for liability because it's actually acting outside of its authority. So I would urge you not to change the current discrimination policy, which includes the traditional protected classes. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson. Nate Johnson.
My stopwatch has begun, lest I embarrass myself and someone tell me to sit down. So 5 minutes is my maximum. First of all, thank you for having the meeting and opening it to the public. It's probably procedure, but thank you anyway. I want to address the non-discrimination addition that the previous speaker had mentioned regarding SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity. It's been the history of non-discriminatory policy to take immutable characteristics, as you all know. You have skin color, you have religion. That's a protected amendment in our Constitution. So it's very important. We can't discriminate against that. Sex, male and female. I'm waiting for the stature one to come out because this is immutable. I ate all the spinach I possibly could and look what happened to me. So these are immutable characteristics that we do not have control over. And if you look at the statistics of self-identifying sexual orientation, they have precipitously climbed in this narrow window, which I think adds support that this is not an immutable characteristic, but a value choice. And when we get into the areas of value choice and non-discriminatory policy, we're getting into deep waters and we're getting into trouble. My concern, if I have one word to explain myself, would be the weaponization of these value choices that some identify with. Now, your concern is that no students suffer the educational process, harm and such like that. I'm all in favor of that. But it works both ways. The last time we met up at the EWC, I had mentioned Harvard's student club run by Christians. It was a Christian club, and they were banned from Harvard because they had in their bylaws that their leadership must abide by the historic Christian faith value system, which limited marriage between one man and one woman. So this was prior to the SOGI thrust. And what happened there? They were shut down. They could not even staff their own leadership on a voluntary club on campus with the values of the very identity that the group holds, the historic Christian faith. Now that's problematic to me. They gave the olive branch. Well, what if we housed ourselves off of the campus, but still was listed? No. And so weaponization is a problem. I believe this occurred even on the halls of our own campus here at the high school, when non-discrimination easily moves over into affirmation. So it's one thing to protect the rights of the minority and keep them free from harassment. It's another when it starts to move over to affirmation. Then you're threatening perhaps those who take a different stance. And indeed, as I recall, there was a mural in the hall. I don't know much about it. It was an affirmation of the SOGI LGBTQ value system. So students on the other side of the wall did something else, caused a ruckus, caused a problem. They had to take theirs down, and I don't know what the end result of it was. And I don't know the particulars, but I'm just saying that this problem can soon come to visit even small town Torrington. Now, with less than a minute to go, I suppose I can just end there and make this meeting end faster. But my concern is the weaponization. My concern is that this is a values choice. It is not an immutable characteristic. And I think we can still protect people, give everyone an education without harm or harassment, without getting into the weeds and inviting the weaponization of an ideology that is coming upon us. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Kruger.
Thank you, dear. Thank you, board members. I'd like to talk to you about a couple of topics tonight. First off, we are about to start a new school year here shortly. And I'm wondering, have you looked into this current grading system to see what you can do to improve the education grading? I've spoke about this several meetings now. I hope that maybe you've taken time to look at it. Now on to the main topic of concern for tonight's meeting. You are considering an anti-discrimination policy. I would strongly urge you to vote against this. And if you can't do that tonight, please be sure because you need more information, I would request that you table the vote until the regularly scheduled meeting in August. If I understood things correctly, it sounds like we might have till September 12th for this particular topic. So here are some reasons why I believe you should vote against this policy, and some of this may sound similar to previous comments. If this were to pass, how are you going to stop a transgender or anyone for that matter from going into a bathroom or a locker room that they choose to go into? I don't think you'll be able to. Do you want something similar that happened in Loudoun County School, where supposedly a 9th grade girl was sexually assaulted by a boy wearing a skirt in a school bathroom? I don't want that to happen. I don't want it to happen here. I don't want it to happen anywhere. Next, I'd like you to think about a female athlete that is or was a complete rock star in their event. Now, what would have happened to that individual had they been made to compete against boys in the female category of the sport? We've seen that play out in swimming. What happened there made national headlines and debates. Why is it that we want to ruin female sports? Remember, why was Title IX created? It was for female sports. Also, did you notice that most of the time people are concerned about female sports and not male sports? Why is that? Maybe it's because we know that most of the time male athletes will have an advantage over the female athlete. Now, that is not true of every sports event or of every athlete, but we should have the same concern if there's a sports event that is divided into gender categories, that females have an advantage over males, and a female was allowed to compete in the male category of the sport. That would be wrong as well. Next, why would we consider passing this policy when our current state superintendent of public instruction is against this type of anti-discrimination policy and what it could lead to? Next, why was the mural that promotes LGBTQ allowed to be painted in Torrington High School? And I believe that is still there. Would you allow a mural to be painted that promotes straight pride? If not, why would you allow this other mural to be painted? And finally, I do believe that it is wrong, that bullying is wrong, and we should consider anti-bullying programs like Rachel's Challenge, which if implemented correctly, can have a huge impact on students. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Mullenkamp?
Hi, thank you for having me tonight. Sorry about my voice. I've been talking too much today. But I moved here 15 years ago from California to get rid of to get away from all the nonsense that was happening in that state. And we can all see what's happening there. I am so glad that I live in Wyoming, but I see what has happened there coming here. And what I'm talking about is I'm concerned about the proposal to change the non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy to add gender identity and sexual orientation. You seem to be putting the cart before the horse. The superintendent, the Wyoming superintendent, Superintendent Schrader, is looking into the state finding a different source for the lunch program. The USDA has not taken your money away yet. Why would we be coming up with this if it's not going to affect us? He wants to find other sources for the school lunch program if that's what you're worried about. And I'm sure that you've considered the discrimination and harassment cases that you'll have from students who would be required to share restroom facilities and locker rooms with the biological opposite sexes. This will also ruin the equity of female sports, which we talked about a little earlier, that we've worked so hard for, to have women be able to have their own sports teams and compete. And it's worthless now because we have biological males that are competing. They can't win in the races with the boys, so they're going to join the girls. So it's just ridiculous. We've seen the results of these female sports things on the national level. I'm also concerned whether your discrimination and anti-harassment procedure would apply to all of us citizens and parents here tonight who are stating our concerns. It sounds like it could, and we've seen this on a national level also. I would urge you not to make these changes. Thank you so much.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you. My name is Bob Peterson. Thank you for the opportunity to let me speak. I think they're covering pretty much what's going on with this policy. It's ridiculous. And why are you trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist now anyhow? And just like Mr. Dobie said, you don't have the authority to do it. We kind of went over this ground when you did the face mask, and you're seeing the consequences of that now too. You also have something called the 1964 Civil Rights Act, where you don't discriminate against anybody. But basically what you're doing is discriminating against people by bringing in other sexes and genders. And the rest of us are supposed to accept that. That's discrimination, reverse discrimination. He worded it much better than I did. Anyhow, I want to cover a couple of other things because they did such a good job with that. Number one, on the budget, right here in the item, it says the budget is included in this packet, which apparently was given to the board members. If you would like a separate bound document, please let the business office know. Why would we have to do that? The open meeting law requires that you have a copy of everything to be discussed for the public to view. And you're not doing that. I requested it. If I have to do a freedom of information, I'll do that. And I do pay the 10 cents a sheet for the copies, don't I, all the time. So I don't have a problem with that. But we shouldn't have to almost beg to see what you're going to discuss at the meeting. As far as the budget concerned, $47 million doesn't mean a thing to me if I can't go down through it and look, where is this $42 million being spent? Enough on that. And another framework of the open meeting law, and I talked to the former president about it too. You don't do roll call votes. And that's very discerning to most people here. We like to see how each representative votes. And I heard one comment, I can't verify, but it was stated that it takes too long to write out all the minutes and go through all of this to have roll call votes. But if you have roll call votes, we know how each individual member of the school court board votes rather than yays and nays. And as you know, I've attended many of these meetings. I watch people's faces very clearly. There'll be yays, maybe half say yay, and there's no nays. That I wanted to cover. And as far as this changing the policy, Mr. Dover covered it very, very well. I'm completely, totally against it. And why are you even adding this policy? Because it's going to go to the higher court and be kicked out. Because the President of the United States does not have the authority. And the school board in Goshen County does not have the authority. You need to work closer with your lawyers. This just will throw this idea out. You've always got a new set of rules, or we're doing more rules. Why would you need so many rules when you've got a school board that they can easily bring the problem to and they can solve it? Thank you very much for your time.
Poston.
I believe there's two.
Sorry, Ashley Poston.
Good evening. So I'm gonna touch on the topic like everybody else tonight, this non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy. I don't want to spend too much time on it since everybody else is talking about it. My biggest concern about it is, are you guys aware that currently there are 72 so-called genders? How do you even begin to accommodate or understand each and every one of those to fulfill this policy? It's going to be impossible, and it's changing daily. I don't know what you're even thinking about, how you're going to try to handle this. My other big concern is I have an 11-year-old daughter who's now approaching middle school age. Like the locker room and bathroom situation, she's very aware that her body is going through changes right now. She is no longer 4 years old running around in the house in front of her dad and her brother in her underwear. She's fully clothed, she has concerns about stuff. She's nervous. And to potentially put her in a locker room with a member of the opposite sex, I think is detrimental to some of these girls. It's hard enough going through puberty and everything else, let alone changing in front of a boy. We don't need to add that to their plate. That was my big concern with all of this, along with the activities. We need to protect female sports, keep boys out of it. I'm not about bullying or harassing. I think a person is a person and they all need to be treated with respect, but a line needs to be drawn. I think this policy is causing more harm than good. Thank you.
Karen Poston.
Once again, Superintendent Kramer and board, thank you for allowing us this opportunity. I bet you can't guess what issue that I'm going to talk about. But my thing is, when we talk about changing the discrimination and harassment, non-discrimination and anti-harassment to include gender identity and sexual orientation, when I talk about not wanting to do that, it's not because I want these students to be discriminated against or harassed. That is absolutely not what I want to see happen. But you have to consider, if you do change this, the bigger issues that it opens, the floodgates. I think all children should feel free to be themselves, whatever themselves are coming to the school. All children should be comfortable, should feel safe And by changing this, right now, you're not going to make the majority of children feel safe or feel comfortable. You know, I would be okay if you were like, okay, we're gonna have a unisex bathroom. Usually, you know, Starbucks has them, filling stations has them. It's usually a single stall, you know, so that the transgender students don't feel like, okay, we're having to go somewhere we don't want to. Okay, I would be fine with that. And if you're gonna talk about that, okay, but having students that are anatomically male go into the female restrooms or locker rooms, that is not okay, because you have a majority of students that you are going to make be really uncomfortable because one student identifies differently. You know, sports, it's totally wrong. I guess if a girl wants to go out for a boys sport, but boys have things that they're just better at because of their whole makeup. And I don't understand you wanting to make a lot of other people feel uncomfortable because of a few students. Yes, go with a unisex bathroom, go with a unisex locker room for, you know, for gym classes and such. But I have to tell you that by just enacting this policy, you're opening up the floodgates to so much else. That's really what I want to say. So thank you for your time.
Mr. Puebla.
I heard it's football season. COVID made it come back. Anyhow, the world has turned many, many times in my almost 85 years of life. I have to change everything I was going to say. Thank you, Mr. Dovey. I grew up at St. Joseph's Orphanage from 1941 when I was 3. What I'm going to talk about is how school was and what I could accomplish when we were being taught and not changing the world, but teaching what we needed to go out and be successful. I left St. Joe's at the end of the 9th grade with $10 in my pocket. I've been retired 32 years from AT&T. Gave the Air Force 6 years. When I was 20 years old, I was flying into the Soviet Union as an electronics warfare officer. My 50 weeks of schooling in the Air Force counted 2 years toward a double E. I gave AT&T and Bell Laboratories 28 and a half years and retired, never had to work again. But 40 of my 84 years were political activists. I ran for office in California. 1992, I was getting ready to run in the 7th Congressional, but the Democrat Party took over California. My wife said, let's get out of here. I've seen the same thing go on in California, and I wanted to help change that or stop it. But my wife said, we're not going to waste our time. When I was growing up, white people who lived across the tracks were considered trash. All brown people and white people had to sit on that side of the theater and couldn't swim in the public pool. Catholics were not allowed to live up on the hill. It's still in the covenants. I went and looked at it just a few weeks ago. We learned to accept that and be proud of who we were and work on that to make ourselves better and everybody around us better. My sister Margaret, 2 years older than me, was a retired school superintendent. We were in the orphanage together. We suffered the same discrimination, but knew that we were the only ones who could change that by knowing that God gave everybody a free will and a right to be wrong. Those people with the discrimination against us were wrong. We couldn't do anything about their problem. So we had to make what we did better. And I think that the world has lost sight of self-building, of self, of using your God-given things. You develop yourself so that you can compete or be better than the next person. Every place I worked, I went up the ladder. My last 7 years at AT&T, I was the Western Region spokesman for divestiture. My son was working, he will be 60 this year, or this month. He was working for AT&T. When it was announced that all the Bell companies and all of the AT&T offices that I would be the go-to person on how to handle divestiture. My phone rang. I said, Paul Pueblo, may I help? My son said, this is Paul Pueblo. Did you hear? Did you hear? AT&T chose the biggest BSer in the whole company. And he was right. Because if you don't promote yourself, nobody else will. And that's what people have to learn to do. Actually, these are not laws you're talking about. Article 1, Section 1 says, all legislative power herein is vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall be a House of Representatives and a Senate. No, I used to lecture on the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution does it give the right of the Supreme Court to overturn the vote of the people. The first time they tried it was in 1796. There were still founders in both houses of Congress. They said, go read Amendment 10 and 11. Pay particular attention to Amendment 10, which says, any duty not delegated to the United States nor prohibited to the state and or the people is the duty of the states and or the people. I guess that says, shut up, huh?
That does mean time.
Well, I'm used to talking forever, but I do want to read you something here. This I pulled out of the 1963 congressional report. The 45 communist goals to change the United States as read into the congressional record.
Mr. Pueblo, your time was limited to 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Ever since they took our country away, they made this thing saying freedom of speech. And I am going to read this. Number 16, use technical decision of courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. 17, get control of schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks. I could read more, but my time is way past.
Mr. Scott Smith.
All righty, well, thank you for letting us all speak. Coming around is a letter from the Family Policy Alliance of Wyoming. And it is basically part of Focus on the Family. So they have a lot of the concerns that the people shared tonight. Thank you, Mr. Dobie, Pastor Johnson, Mr. Kruger, everyone. We just appreciate what you said. Just to bring forth a few other items in regards to like the slippery slope. If we're willing to compromise on these things, what else are we willing to compromise on? And where does that slippery slope end?
And once that ball gets rolling, it's really hard to stop. Because I think a lot of things are done with good intentions, but unfortunately, we have a lot of unintended consequences. And I think our society is showing that right now in just about every area. Things that have happened that were allowed in school a long time ago, like faith and prayer and scripture reading and things like that, we've allowed to stop and not speak up for, and now it's almost impossible. I also encourage you to not buy into the cult of indoctrination, which I think is a lot of what's going on. And also a couple points that this Family Policy Alliance from Nathan Winters brought forth. I'll just read a couple things that really stood out to me. Is these proposed rule changes to Title IX add sexual orientation and gender identity to the definition of sex in the statute, including within the definition of sexual harassment and discrimination on the basis of sex, and increase the requirements Title IX schools have to accommodate pregnancy and pregnancy-related conditions, which would then also include abortions. So I think there's whole other realms that we're not even aware of. Then I can't imagine going to school walking on eggshells, because one of the things here that Mr. Winters points out on the end of the last page is the misgendering and use of biologically accurate pronouns instead of chosen pronouns. That would be a whole nother realm. And so looking around, I understand science and biology, and I can, good morning, Mr. or Mrs. is kind of an easy thing. But if we walk around not knowing how people identify as, I think that would just create even more stress for the children on not how to address people. Then also one last thing is, I believe we become what we focus on. And I think everyone in this room has their own things and issues that they've overcome and adversities. For me, I deal with a physical disability. So I'm part of the protected class, but I don't focus, excuse me, on my disability. That's not who I am. I identify as a person. And one of the things that I identify most as important to me is my relationship with Jesus Christ. And so I think we are what we focus on. And so are you focusing on these nuances that are coming, or chosen pronouns and things like that? So last thing that Mr. Winter says is, I urge you to pause before voting to accept any new rule in response to this highly controversial and likely short-lived policy that destroys the principle of government closest to the people, governs best. So here's the people. So thank you.
Ms. Steinmetz.
Well, hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I know I'm here to talk to you as a fellow elected official, as your state senator tonight. And we have dealt with these issues several times. A lot of what I have in a packet for you, which I'll hand out after I speak, has been addressed, particularly with state law, state statute, and federal law. And as of most recently, the Supreme Court decision on June 30th, 2022, West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency, where the Supreme Court ruled that administrative agencies must comply with the laws established by Congress. That will have rippling effects through all of our federal agencies and their rules and their guidance. Right now, the USDA has issued this rule in the form of guidance. what is guidance? And I have provided this to you as well. It is a recommendation by the USDA or any regulatory agency which has no effect or force of law or enforcement mechanisms. So right now, this is basically a recommendation, and it is voluntary if you choose to comply. The state of Wyoming is fighting this. 25 other states are fighting this. And for us to throw in the towel now would be an act saying that we are affirming this and not fighting it. Just so we're clear on that. I know it's not an easy time to be in public service or in public office, but the thing that I always remind myself of is we don't work for the federal government. We work for the citizens. We work for the folks that are sitting here. I work for you, and I'm going to stand up for you at the state level. Our superintendent of public instruction is, our attorney general is, and we, you know, being on the appropriations committee, I already can tell you we have a few years of reserve left, even if it would go down the road of this, and then it would get us probably to another election cycle. So it's a premature action to take this step at this time with regard to adding this to our anti-discrimination and sexual harassment policy. I would also like to tell you that last legislative session, we had a bill called Fairness in Women's Sports Act, and it overwhelmingly passed the Senate. Unfortunately, the Speaker of the House hid it in his desk drawer and didn't bring it out for the House to even consider. And I can tell you that the citizens from across this state want that bill to be passed because we already have a place for people who are wanting to basically be involved in co-ed sports, because that's what it is. We have women's sports and men's sports, and we have co-ed sports, and we can proceed forward in that way. There are ways to do this. In conclusion, I just want to read you out of our Constitution. We had attempted, the Management Council, which helps with the state legislatures, management of employees and staff and all of that, had tried to put something like this into their policy. We repealed it, and this is why. There are several equality articles in our Constitution, but Article 1, Section 3 says equal political rights. Since equality and the enjoyment of natural and civil rights is only made sure through political equity, the laws of the state affecting the political rights and privileges of its citizens shall be without distinction of race, color, sex, or any circumstance or condition whatsoever other than individual incompetency or unworthiness duly asserted by a court of competent jurisdiction. Also in Article 1, Section 2, equality of all, in their inherent right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all members of the human race are equal. That is our Wyoming State Constitution. This has already been taken care of in the state of Wyoming. And I would stand for any questions if you have them. I know that reaction and interaction between the board is not something you always do, but being a fellow elected representative, I would be glad to answer any questions you might have. All right, thank you very much, and I'll hand these out to you.
Thank you. Let's go on.
Tonight I have 4 or 5 things I'd like to address. Number one, did you hear about the school shooting where the suspect was met by a school official who also had a weapon? No, you didn't, because the suspect was chased into the school gym where police officials came and dispatched the subject. You see, that happened in less than 5 minutes. I was wondering how your 5-minute plan was going. Yeah, okay, nowhere. Second of all, questions on the Title IX. First of all, are they regulations or is it law? Because I thought it was a regulation, yet Mr. Fuller continued to call it law, so I was confused about that. Second of all, if we have an individual who does something like Bobby snaps Jenny's bra and nothing really comes of it, is that person's information put into a file and then maybe later he slaps Jenny on the butt? Both of those would be considered sexual harassment, but would that information accumulate and build over time so that maybe by the third time he does something that's a little shady, we go, this kid really has a problem? Number three, how is your search for the speech therapist going for my daughter? Nowhere. Okay. Fourth, did you see that episode on that one TV show where scrawny little Jimmy gets his lunch money taken away by the bullies? You know, it's been in several shows, same thing, different shows. What happens to the end? What happens to the bully, guys? He gets beat up, doesn't he? See, the federal government says, we're not going to give you your lunch money. We're taking your lunch money if you don't put the non-discriminatory language in your policies. That's what it boils down to. They're taking your lunch money. Now you have to decide how you're going to handle the bully. Because they want to start with the non-discriminatory language and transgender, which I'm confused because if it is a sex, like they say it is, male, female, then it should be covered under the sex. So then why do we need to add it under here over the transgender thing? That makes it a whole new thing. And now you're discriminating against the people who are straight. And since when do we talk about what goes on behind closed door in our bedroom out in public? Why do I have to identify as being straight? Why do you have to identify as being homosexual or transgender or a furry? Why is that possible? Why? Because the next thing they want to bring in is they want to teach the little kids, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use some very sexually explicit language here for all of you with delicate ears and children. See, what happens in California doesn't stay in California, because this started in California and now they want to bring it everywhere else. So what are they doing in California now? They're teaching second and third graders how to masturbate, how to use adult sex toys, how to perform oral sex, and that pornography is fine educational material. And that's the slippery slope they are introducing here with this language. And you know it. Somewhere inside all of you, you know it, that this is where this is headed. Now, as it has been stated previously, we do not need to pass this. You have time. You have months at the least, years at best. This is up in litigation or potential litigation. No action needs to be taken on this. And again, you do not have the authority to do this. Thank you.
Thank you for all those who spoke during our public forum this evening. No additional slips. Moving forward with recommended actions. Item E. Number 1 is to approve the consent agenda. Is there a motion? Move to approve the consent agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Discussion. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 2, old business. Letter A is to consider approval of proposed revisions to district policy 4300/51, non-discrimination and anti-harassment procedure. This is administrative regulation and exhibit as presented on second and final reading. It's been recommended to approve the proposed revisions to the administrative regulation and exhibit for this district policy 4300/51, non-discrimination and anti-harassment procedure as presented on second and final reading.
I just want to point out that this is the administrative regulations that have not been changed from the first reading last month. This is not reflective of any changes in language that we've been discussing this evening. This is the administrative regulations that are not pertinent to that. So as you hear that title, they may have certain ears, but I want to make sure I make that clarification before that motion can be made.
Hearing that, is there a motion?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the proposed revisions to the administrative regulation and exhibit for district policy 4300/5100, non-discrimination and anti-harassment procedures on second and final reading. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Abstentions? Motion carries. Item B is a tabled item, which is to consider the approval of practice and process of utilizing neurofeedback tools by district counselors. As a reminder, the recommendation list that this item was tabled at the June 2022 board meeting. Discussed and considered future utilization by district counselors. Information was presented at the May 22nd board meeting. Is there a motion to approve the practice and process of utilizing neurofeedback by district counselors? Or other motion? Then motion to approve, is there a second?
I'll second.
So in a motion and a second, any discussion?
My concern with this is that it would be overburdening for our counselors. It seems like an additional ask for them when we're already asking an awful lot. It might be better service in private sector. And from the May meeting, I don't think we've received much additional information, have we, regarding what that time would look like or the costs for our school district?
Other than the policies that were provided at that June meeting, and how they would outline that and what they would do also in that June meeting, the cost and estimate for those items, which would include multiple sources in each building. The price tag on that is $98,955. It's a pretty significant cost that we have not budgeted in this budget year before. And that might be something to look at in the future and have some more ideas in relation to how this might be better utilized. But there is not additional information beyond those that I just referenced.
Is it currently available, private sector locally?
I am unaware if it is available locally.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I certainly like the concept, and the idea through the presentation they gave, and I would love to see more information on it, if that's possible.
I too have some concerns regarding that. I mean, I believe in I guess the advocacy of the counselors of wanting to actually establish that within our district. However, the concerns being the price tag that was just actually mentioned. The other is that I really feel that at this point, this it really writes that fine line on whether or not a district should be doing that. If there was a collaborative relationship within the community where, again, there was a private service provider and we would be able to actually contract with them, then that's maybe something that we could actually look into. But to establish that within our district, I'd be somewhat concerned with that. The other thing is, I appreciate the fact that the counselors want to go this direction. However, I'm still unsure of how solid our social emotional learning programs within our district. I think we need to be a little bit more foundationally sound in what we're doing before we go to this extent.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd also piggyback on what trustee Saucedo said. We're flirting with the line of providing therapy, and we're not, that's not within our purview. Counseling, yes, but not therapy. I appreciated the counselor's enthusiasm and outlook for being able to utilize this program for student success, but I'm apprehensive.
Any other discussion?
My take when the counselors did come, I guess 2 months ago, and do their presentation, I felt that they were all very overwhelmed. With everything that they had to do throughout the day. I think they thought that this, or hoped that this might just be an extra tool that they could possibly put in their toolbox and possibly use. Not on a mass scale, but parents would have to conform to it, written consent. So I guess I'm stuck in the middle on it. I just feel that they were super overwhelmed, and if we're not going to give them this tool, I think we need to look into other resources and other tools that can help them.
Any further discussion?
I also feel that the price tag on it is just more than what we can handle at this point in time.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the practice and process of utilizing neurofeedback tools by the district counselors. All those in favor of approval, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Any abstentions?
Aye.
So one abstention. Motion would fail. I would encourage the district counselors, as we continue forward with that, to bring back any additional tools or other resources, to Mr. Hager's point, that they feel would benefit them, as it's correct. They have a tall task in front of them. Or bring back more information on this topic for reconsideration. Item 3 then is new business. Item A under new business is consider the approval of amended fiscal year 2021-2022 district budget. The recommendation is to approve the amended fiscal year 21 budget as presented. Is there a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the amended fiscal year 2021-22 budget as presented. Is there any discussion? Kate, if you might enlighten us now.
Sure. I will share my screen real quick. I'm going to be working off of page 58 going forward. And what I have here on the screen the amended budget, for those of you that have been on the board for a little while, if you remember, this process typically happens at the last meeting in June. This year it was decided to not have an end of the month June meeting, and I was authorized to pay all end of the fiscal year bills. And that pushed the amended budget here to this July meeting. Having said that, the amended budget is being needed for three funds: food service, student activities, and the rec fund. Those three funds needed increase due to revenue. The general fund is the one that we pay a lot of attention on. And as you remember, we were allowed to carry over up to 20% for the general fund. I'm anticipating that when we close this year, we'll be at 19.3% or cash reserves of 6.5%. If you look through at the general fund level.
Sorry, Ms. Cates, just to clarify your you mentioned 18.3% and 6.5%. I believe you meant 6.5 million.
Yes, 6.5 million. Thank you. As you look at the general fund, I'm tasked in dealing with the auditors to look at 4 different categories, that being instruction, instructional support, general support, and non-instructional services. And in doing that, we do need to make some adjustments between those 3 categories in order to get our budget and our expenditures in line. So I'm asking for those 3 adjustments. On the special revenue fund, I'm asking for, and for those of you with the packet, that's page 63. I'm asking for some classification readjustments between instruction, instructional support, general support, food service operations, and the architecture and engineering services. Those 4 categories, I'm not increasing the budget. I'm simply needing to move expenditures between those categories in order to get our budget to exceed the expenditures. If we move on to page 66, food service, and we're going to spend some time talking about food service a little bit later, but this year we did have free meals for all kids. That necessitated our service and our number of meals increasing because of the free meals. It also increased our revenue. So production went up, revenue from the USDA went up. In looking at this, in order to keep our food service operations in line, that needs to be increased by 200,000. Between our revenues and our cash on hand, we do have the coverage for that increase to the food service fund. Student activities is on page 67. And that particular fund is where our fundraising money goes. This is our student activity groups, as they raise money for various purposes. The money comes into here and then the expenditures happen out of here. It was budgeted that they would raise 400,000 and they're going to be raising over 500,000. So revenues increase and then their expenditures in turn increase based upon that increased fundraising revenue. The last one is on page 68, that being the rec fund. And we typically talk about that one each year. When the rec board meets, they meet the first part of March to award their projects. And the projects span 2 fiscal years. So the projects are awarded in March. They have through the February meeting to March 22nd, projects were awarded. They had until February 1st to expend that money. February 1st of 2023. Consequently, we're spanning 2 different fiscal years. There's cash on hand to substantiate an increase in expenditures of $100,000. That simply being that the expenditures appear to be increasing on what was budgeted. So having shared that with you, I would entertain any questions.
Any comments or questions for Ms. Cates? No comments. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. B is to consider approval of the mill levy taxes for the 2022-2023 school year. The recommendation is to approve the mill levies at 1 mil for the recreation levy and ½ mil BOCES levy and 25 mil tax levy. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded to approve the mill levies as presented. Any discussion? Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
because I'm new here, the ½ mil BOCES levy, is that new? Okay, that's what goes towards the student driving, the collegiate classes. Okay, gotcha.
Any other comments in this case?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, that's often thought of as a higher education BOCES that's covering our dual and concurrent enrollment as well as driver's ed.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the proposed mill levies at 1 mil recreation levy, 1/2 mil BOCES levy, and 25 mil tax levy, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Item C then is to consider the approval of district mill prices for the 2022-2023 school year. The recommendation is to approve increasing student load and a la carte mill prices for the 2022-2023 school year as presented on page 71. Is there a motion?
I move to approve this item.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Just so those that are in the audience understand, in case you do not have this in front of you, the price would escalate by 10 cents for each of those categories. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The 10 cents is historically what the district is allowed as far as the minimum coming from the state. This year, we did have the option to increase by a greater dollar amount, or greater cents. And we felt like this wasn't the year, given that people were coming off of having received free meals and having not had to apply for free and reduced lunches and all of the confusion that could be caused with that. We also have the possibility, and we'll be looking at potentially maybe using some ESSER money if we have a need to offset that increase in price.
Any further discussion?
Thank you for that information.
All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the increase of student, adult, and a la carte meal prices for the 2022-2023 school year, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any positions? Item D then is to consider approval of district gate admission prices for the 2022-2023 school year. It's been recommended to approve setting gate admission prices for the 2022-2023 school year at the rate of $5 per person, excluding district students, employees, and $25 per year for the annual admission pass per district policy 3651.1. Is there a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the gate admission prices for the upcoming 2022-2023 school year. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, does that money go back into the athletic department for programs?
In the budget line items in your revenue, you're gonna see an exclusive gate receipts, gate admission category. And the intent has always been that that gate admission funds officials as well as culminating event travel. Honestly, it's put towards that purpose, but it does not come close to covering that cost. And when we look at the revenue and the expenses of the budget, I'll point that out to you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving setting the gate admission prices for the 2022-2023 school year at the rate of $5 per person excluding district students and employees, and a $25 per year for the annual admission pass for district policy 3651.1, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Item E then is to consider the adoption of the 2022-2023 budget. The budget is included in your packet this evening. It's been recommended to approve the budget as for the 2022-2023 or fiscal year 23 budget as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the budget for the upcoming fiscal year 23. Is there any discussion? Ms. Gates.
Should this document this probably will allow it to be a little bit bigger, so we'll just work with this. If we start on page 79, and I will move backwards then from 79 to 78. The focus on general fund is where we at when we projected to end the year. And if we look here at the very bottom, I talked about where fiscal year 22 was projected to end. Fiscal year 23, I have projected that we would be at a current carryover of 14.55%. And that dollar amount would be right there at $5,025,000. We do look to be spending $1.5 million of the current fiscal year 22's carryover based upon the budget that's presented tonight. The expenditures are in line with what we talked through with the preliminary budget. The difference is simply a result of the revenue availability. That if we go back and look at the revenue, the fourth column is where I projected that 22 fiscal year will end, in the budget that's being proposed this evening is in the far right column. If you go down, I wanted to point out in particular 81710, when we talk about gate receipts, fiscal year 22, we had about 20,000 in gate receipts. I'm projecting that with the increase, we'll be close to $25,000. And when we go into the body of the expenditures, you'll see the athletics budgets and what those look like, and they're quite a bit higher. So looking down here, I'm showing going from 30.8 million to 31,174,000 in revenue. our taxes do show to be going up. However, when we talk about the school foundation program and the funding model that education gets their funding based upon, those taxes are backed off of what we actually receive. So we did have the declining enrollment that we've talked about. There was a change in the timing of when we receive our taxes. So we received approximately 600,000 in fiscal year 22 that in the past we would have received in fiscal year 23. We just received them slightly sooner, and that was part of that increase to cash reserve that I talked about with the fiscal year 22 budget. If we go on through here, just to touch upon the expenditure items, and I'm not going to walk through all of these, but if you look at the projected line and you look at the budget line, we do see some increases. If you just look at the top one, that being the elementary instruction, there's about a $90,000 increase there. I want you to think about the increase that was made to the salary schedule, and both to classified and certified. Our retirement increases when our base salary increases. And then we also have the health insurance that we're paying the portion of for all of our employees. If you look through the individual line items, you're going to see the increases in the salary or the baseline. You're not going to see as much of an increase in the health insurance line because we asked our employees to contribute more than what they had been contributing in the past. So there's two key categories. There's a junior high activities and a high school activities. And when we talk about $25,000 being budgeted for gate receipts, junior high activities is budgeted at $299,000 and high school activities is budgeted at $940,000. That's coaches, supplies, travel, officials, all that kind of stuff. So it's helping with the cost of athletics, but it is not paying for it in total. This budget that I have here, just to highlight a couple of things, we do have the added expenditures that we talked through for Title IX. That's shown here in the budget. We also have added expenditures in adding an additional SRO that we had talked through with the preliminary budget. We have some added money due to the projected increases in utilities, that being both in the transportation line items as well as in our utility line items. That if we go down here to the bottom, you're going to see expenditures do show from a projected $29,186,000 to a projected $32,674,000. I want you to recognize that there also is $2 million budgeted in both the revenue side and the expenditure side for the insurance proceeds associated with the Southeast Fire Restoration Project. So we have equipment that will be replaced, and then we also have the building that will be replaced. So we have that in both the revenue and the expenditures. The expenditures are showing going up, but you kind of need to pull that $2 million out and compare $29,186,000 to a $30,674,000. Before I go on to the next funds, do you have any questions on general fund? The next fund would be on page 91 in your packets. And that's the special funds. This is where our federal dollars are housed. This is our ESSER and CARES money. With this, we also have several other grants, literacy grant, a technology virtual ed grant that Mr. Fuller wrote and the board approved, those based upon approval from the state. So we're looking at total revenues of $7 million and total expenditures of $7 million. Major maintenance is the fund where we house state money exclusively for the purpose of upkeeping our buildings. So the state is required to provide us with these funds. And then as we're ready to use these funds, we have to request approval from the state that they be used for the purpose intended. We look to be receiving $1.8 million and it's budgeted to spend all of that plus interest. That's used for roof replacement, flooring replacement, elevator, all of those types of projects. Capital construction is state money as well as money that the board has earmarked in the past for capital construction or FF&E purposes. This fund has $375,000 budgeted, and that money will be seen for those that were on the board 12 to 18 months ago. It was approved that the board request an allocation from the state to demo the tech ed building. That being an approved project, that money would funnel in here and from the state, and then we would pay the bills out of this fund. Food service, because of the changes in the elimination of the free meals for all students, this fund is budgeted at both revenues and expenditures decreasing. But I'm looking at a $1,170,000 budget, that being both salaries and supplies to provide both breakfast and lunches for either those students that qualify for free and reduced or those that are fully paid. I talked a little bit about the student activity fund when we were amending it, but based upon past activity, I had that budgeted at students raising $500,000 and in turn expending $500,000, that being exclusively for fundraising purposes. The rec fund, that's one of the mills that was approved this evening. That's exclusively for recreation projects that a couple of board members here participated in the award of those projects. That's budgeted at $471,000, looking at the cash available. Typically, there's an award of about $250,000 to $300,000. And then BOCES is the last fund. This is the half mil that was approved tonight for dual and concurrent enrollment. We look for the half mil to generate $127,000. In doing that, we pay EWC for dual and concurrent tuition and fees. And then the way the statute reads, they are obligated to pay us for the concurrent because we're providing the teachers. So we receive some concurrent revenue. I have total revenue budgeted at $502,000 and then expenditures at the same amount. So I would entertain any questions in regards to the funds.
Regarding the rec board fund, just remind me, there's always a cash carryover. Is that because of the fiscal year issue that the school operates on different fiscal year than that fund?
Yep, that fund based upon the award is operating March to February, and we're operating July to June.
So we always allocate the entire amount that is gathered through the mill.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
We make that available. They don't always award it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I believe all of us had the opportunity to discuss the budget over the last couple of months with Ms. Kate and or with Mr. Kramer. So hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of approving the fiscal year 23 budget as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Item F then, before we move on, I apologize. Just thank you so much for your diligence in preparing these documents and these budgets. We always seem to be right on or below budget related to expenditures. And so that is your attention to that detail is definitely appreciated, and our auditors always comment on your attention there. So thank you. Item F, consider approval of student tuition for the 2022-2023 school year. It's recommended to approve the student tuition for the 22-23 school year in the amount of $18,649. Is there a motion?
I move to approve this item.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Item G, consider approval of offering, I'm going to take out teaching and just consider approval offering teaching contracts for the 22-23 school year. It's recommended to approve offering an employment contract to Carrie Hurley as a school nurse for TMS and THS, and an additional teaching contract to Kaylee Bonsack as a half-time academic interventionist at THS for the 22-23 school year. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? I would abstain. Item H, consider approval of proposed revisions to district policy 4300/51, non-discrimination and anti-harassment. The recommendation is to approve the proposed revision to district policy 4300/5100 as presented on introduction and first reading. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Motion. Second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I appreciate the public coming out and expressing your opinion. It was overwhelming, obviously, and I appreciate you coming out. I think this is nor the time nor the place to go ahead and go with this, just due to some of the considerations this opens the door for. So I will vote against this.
Further discussion.
I just make, oh, sorry, go ahead. I'm just gonna make a statement just directed at our federal government, not really anybody in this room, but I believe it's 100% Satan sitting behind a dollar bill wrapped up in a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on what they're doing, this type of rhetoric concerned with kids' food. I would never vote for this in a million years.
Chairs.
My question would just be why we are discussing this tonight, if there isn't a requirement tonight in our funding to this happening now.
So we have, in order to have items put out for free and reduced lunch applications, The statement needs to be included on those applications and posters and advertisements for that information. There is a piece, and that's where this is why it's this evening. To move forward with that application, we have to indicate to the state of Wyoming whether we would declare non-compliance or compliance. There has not been an indication as to whether they would withhold or plan to withhold any funds. We just have to indicate a compliance or non-compliance on the application. We are not scheduled for a visit or an audit in regards to our program for the lunch program until the fiscal year 2024. There are other schools, and obviously as it's a rotational basis, but we would not be audited under this until the following school year. In consultation with our attorney, there is a lot of case reference and things that he refers to. I'm just going to kind of give a summation of how, given the recent case law and the current Office of Civil Rights guidelines, nearly all of the current authority points the same direction. That is, the cases require schools to approve the USDA policy wording and language.
Thank you.
I think it's also a few things came up. So when this got brought up on our agenda planning meeting is when the initial item was brought forward to myself and Mr. Sussex on how to approach this. Following that, Mr. Kramer, of course, you heard a quote from our attorney. And then I have done some research, and as was alluded to by Mr. Dovey, a lot of this, and a number of you referenced the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and Title VII and Title IX are both components of that, and it is the majority opinion that was authored by the Trump-appointed conservative justice Neil Gorsuch in that case related to Title VII, where this definition included gender identity and sexual orientation. And so because it is within the Civil Rights Act, the same act, it is carried through the remainder of that document. That definition has carried through the remainder of the document, has been the guidance following that Supreme Court decision. And that's where this policy from the USDA, the language, why it has been suggested by the USDA. Now, it may be tried in court again, as mentioned out here this evening, but that is the why behind it. As much as I can find is why this has come forward. To that end, I do think that it's interesting in that, I appreciate Ms. Senator Steinmetz presenting to us this evening. I referenced my copy of the Constitution that was provided to me by her, and it does state in Article 1, Section 2, equality of all in their inherent right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All members of the human race are equal. And so I think that's the point at which we're discussing this evening is that current, or as per the court's decision, is this language needed in our policies? Current guidance would suggest it is, and that is the, again, from that majority opinion in the case that was referenced by Mr. W. in 2020. Any further discussion?
I'm going to respond, or Trustee Hager, if you want to go first, I just want to respond. Question Trustee Sussex had in that meeting was referencing the inclusion of transgender students or students identifying as a different sex using an alternative bathroom location and participation in sports. Whether or not these words are added, that does not actually have any bearing on the allowance of or not allowance of. It was referenced a couple of times that those words, by adding that, we are giving the green light to that, or that would be what would happen. Those words don't actually start that. Case law, as our school attorney, has already determined that regardless of what our policy is, whether we accept this change of language or not, that is what would be part of the factoring in that, not whether this language would be added in those words or not, based on what the decision of the board this evening.
And as an employer, we already have to adhere to the Title VII ruling that was made in 2020 as far as anti-discrimination. Any further discussion?
It's important to remember, we're not just referencing students here, we're referencing all our employees as well.
And one thing I want to appreciate too, Chairman Miller and Vice Chair Sussex, in the conversation leading up to the agenda piece. This is typically not something, the policy is something that would be approved, but the relation to the language and those types of things are not necessarily something that we put on a first reading. It was their suggestion that this be part of a conversation in public to allow for public comment and allow for the board to have that discussion related to this topic. So it was something that we could have out in the open, have a discussion related to those items as opposed to individuals making those determinations not in a public setting.
Any further discussion?
So what if tonight that it doesn't get approved, then what's our next step with?
So what I would do is I'd identify on the policy. So the policy itself, there's two different things that would happen. So the policy would go back to the original language, and that would be included, what is already stated, that has already been a policy that has been approved. The other piece to that is tied to it is our application regarding the USDA. We would just indicate non-compliance on that application.
Okay. And we don't know the outcome of that checkbox.
We do not.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, my communication with the food service department at WTE is essentially that as a district, we have to state compliance or non-compliance. And regardless which option is chosen, then we have to be consistent in ensuring that the non-discrimination poster, the free and reduced application, and the policy be consistent. So if we choose non-compliance, everything needs to be essentially as it was last year. If we choose compliance and we change the policy, then we have to ensure that the statement on the free and reduced application and our poster that we're required to post in all break rooms because of being an employer has the new wordage on it.
And to just further clarify on Mr. Chair's your question around why now, there was some discussion around let's wait until August for this, but our policy, any change to policy, as you know, requires 2 readings. And so if we were going to make the change and be compliant by September, we would have to have first reading this evening, second reading in August, as our board meeting in September would not allow adequate time to be compliant by that meeting.
Mr. Chair, the other item with that is that we need to get free and reduced applications available for families by the 1st of August. So in doing so, we just need to know which way the district chooses to go.
Just so I'm kind of straight here, so either way, if we went either way with this, basically what I'm hearing is other than the language on the form, we don't know any other ramifications from this. Or if we do adopt it, we don't fully know ramifications of that either.
I guess clarify on the ramifications.
Just like the public said, there, it's so confusing to so many people. What does this mean? All we're saying is, well, it means that there's language on this USDA form, but what else does it mean? Nobody knows. And I think that's just where the confusion comes from.
Okay. Any further question or sorry, any further discussion? All right, I will call for a roll call vote. We'll start with Ms. Pollington,
Aye.
Mr. Cushman,
No.
Ms. Chairs.
Nay.
Nick?
No.
Perfect, thank you. Mr. Hager,
No.
Mr. Hurley,
No.
Ms. Patrick,
Aye.
Mr. Salcedo,
Aye.
Mr. Sussex.
No.
Motion to fail. Hearing that, our policy will continue to remain as currently written in policy. Item I then is to consider the approval of contracting with Absolute Solutions for the upgrade of district radio systems. The recommendation is to approve contracting with Absolute Solutions for the purchase of a district Motorola radio system upgrade. In the total amount of $14,176.50. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
we moved and seconded to approve this item. Is there any discussion?
Are these for the buses? Is that?
So this is part of the updates on radios. Brian, would you be able to best explain exactly what this is doing in tech terms, dumbed down to where I understand it? So I'm sure the board members will fully grasp what we're trying to do.
Radios in the past have been analog radios, and that has kind of faded away. Some of the law enforcement folks use analog radios. The new thing is digital radios, and so they have to be able to talk to each other, or else the police force or the sheriff outside the school can't talk to the people inside the school because they're two different types. So what we've been attempting to do over the past few years has been to make it so that our police forces, emergency management folks can speak to each other as well as to us, and no matter what kind of radio that we use. And so we've been developing that, and this stage we received a grant to complete the bridge process, and you see that a bid is coming up for that, which creates a device that can listen to both sides of that, and these particular radios are part of that. Make it kind of simple. So each school will have a radio there. They're just a console radio that each school will have that will be able to speak to that advice. So that's kind of simple, but that's kind of right. I hope that helps.
Yeah, sounds good.
It's kind of over my head too.
Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
could I ask your indulgence in allowing the folks who are no longer interested in the remainder of our meeting to exit at this time if they so choose?
Please, yes. I think many have already made that decision, but if you would so like, please feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item J is to consider the approval of proposed revisions to District Policy 5113, student attendance, as presented on on introduction and first reading. It's recommended to approve. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
I can speak to it just real quick. One of the items that we really wanted to curtail was, of course, some changes that have been made over the years in what kind of we're looking at attendance. The other piece is regarding truancy and that definitive difference between truancy and absenteeism. Truancy is strictly defined and has very curtailed pieces and steps tied to it that involve outside of administration at school level. And so when a absent student notifies the office of an absence. There may be situations where that isn't considered truant. There's numbers tied to truancy where there's no regard for a reason why a student is absent or a reason is never given. Those fall under truancy. If there's reasons for an absence, they would fall under the absenteeism policy, and then those have also specific school level consequences, but not related to what might be the county attorney involvement in those situations.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the policy as presented on first reading, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Abstentions. Motion carries. Item L is to consider approval of contracting with the Institute for Multisensory Education. You are correct. They're the same number for the point there. Sorry, backing up to item K. Consider the approval of proposed revisions to district policy 5113.1, which is truancy, as presented on the introduction and first reading. It's been recommended to approve the policy as presented. Is there a motion?
I move to approve this item.
For a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
I just have a question, and it might be in the handbook, but downward say referencing like the 3 unexcused absences, 5 unexcused. Any more details behind that? Is it per class, per semester, per? It doesn't say.
So on the truancy piece, it references the unexcused absences. When we get into the school level absenteeism, there's more specificity around what that means at each level and how many days. So on the truancy piece, it would be the equivalent of an unexcused absence on a day, which would then include one class. It could be unexcused. And then if you reference that student attendance policy in 7 through 12, it kind of goes into a little bit more specifics and related to what course that might be. And if it's the same course at the elementary level, if it's that same half day, if there's those types of contingencies and conversations being had after 3 and after 5 on the truancy level.
Per semester.
That is per semester is also included on that truancy piece with but I think we probably looking at that. I would suggest an editorial change being referenced there. So a motion to add that so more clarity can be given in that policy. If a trustee would be willing to make that suggestion in an editorial motion. Would you be willing to do that? Yeah.
So how would that be written? Sorry.
Well, I think it would just.
So this is first reading, correct?
Yep.
So could we have Mr. Hager get with you to add that for the second reading?
Yep.
And then,
And we can add for just an editorial change. I think it probably what I would suggest, and if you're all right with this, is after 3 unexcused absences per semester and the same after the 5. I think that's where we'll be cleaning it up pretty nicely.
objections to that? Okay, so it's been moved to approve this policy as presented with the editorial changes of per semester following in paragraph 2, where it says 3 unexcused absences per semester. I'm moving down 2 lines to 5 unexcused absences per semester. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Item L is to consider approval of contracting with the Institute for Multisensory Education for special education professional development days for 10 days of coaching, training, professional development services for special education staff from September 6th through March 24th. Sorry, September 6th, 2022 through March 24th, 2023, in the total amount of $26,000 funded by the Special Ed 6B and ARP funding. Is there a motion?
I move to approve this item.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item M is to consider approval of contracting for Southeast Schools Gymnasium lighting upgrade. It's recommended to approve contracting with Pittman Electric for lighting upgrades in Southeast Schools, elementary gym, and high school gym in the total amount of $32,134.35. Is there a motion?
I so move.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
Why, Mr. Chairman, why such a difference in the two bids? That was crazy.
Is a very interesting question that we searched diligently through that to ascertain that, to make sure that we checked all the boxes, to make sure that those bids were equal. But yes, we were equally surprised by the differences.
So where were these funds coming out of?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, this would be major maintenance funding.
So does this take away the mercury lights that take forever to turn on if they have to be turned off? Great.
These would be LED lights.
Okay, great.
So the timing of graduation, you know,
Yes.
as Mr. Epler had timed it perfectly to have after the slideshow,
Yes.
will not have to be timed
All
so
right.
perfectly in the future.
Very good. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Item F then is topics for discussion. So we wanted to have a discussion. I'll turn some time over to Mr. Kramer around discussion on scheduling and advertising work sessions. I know you and Ms. Chairs had some good discussion around what those might look like at the various at schools.
So we discussed some options and how it might work, and what we kind of came up with, and talking with trustee Miller and trustee Sussex. There was definite interest in engaging our community in this way and looking at it as a school board roundtable, probably ranging in time from an hour to an hour and a half timeframe, with individual board members sitting at individual groups with small groups of 5 to 8 community members, and then assigning tasks to those individuals in the small groups from note taking to have an engaging conversation centered around really 2 central principles. What things does the board need to discuss more and to improve possibly student learning in Goshen County? And then also encompassing those suggestions for improvement, so we can get to some specificity on relation to what our community members are seeing and how that might assist us in making decisions at the administration level, at the board level, at the teacher level, all of those things, to have engaging conversation. Because as we know, public comment and many times work sessions aren't very conducive to the interaction and back and forth, and requires either a time limit or not as much interaction related to some of the things that we're trying to do. By making and taking those steps, we would be encouraging conversations that would possibly look at what things we should make sure and celebrate and continue and support, possibly even more, that may expand and assist student learning. Looking at dates in early August, there are quite a few conflicting events that occur, but there are a number of dates that I would like you to take a look at and think about. And then I'll have Lorene actually contact individual board members. This would not be something that each individual board member would have to attend every location, but they could attend different locations, and then we can divide and conquer that way if that is conducive to more of the activities and things. Then following these 3 listening sessions, we would have a work session culminating with all of that information. And then we could have further discussion at the board level to kind of tie and set some rules that we can relate to and some updates that we might need more data to have further discussion around. So the dates that I'd like you to take a look at, that Lorraine will be contacting you, and this is actually something and please speak up if these are just dates that to stay away from. August 8th, 10th, 11 is when there is a conflict at Southeast. There's a fall sports parent meeting that evening on the 11th. The 15th, the 16th, and then 17th and 18th. We do have a conflict with 17th and 18th, as that is the state fair. So that may be some dates to also stay away from, as that could take some of our community members away from participating in those activities.
And to clarify, maximum number of board members at any one given listening session should remain at 4.
So we can have the total board, because we can advertise it, we can post it just like a work session, and we can have those listening opportunities. So there is no limit. If we have everybody attending one and a smaller number attending another, that is perfectly fine. There's no set number that has to be granted, and there's no number that has to be exceeded, because we can certainly advertise it as a work session, and we'll do so, so we can make sure we have the number of board members that want to participate.
So are we thinking basically 3?
3 nights.
Yeah.
Where?
So one would take place out in Southeast, one would take place at Lingle, and one would take place at the Torrington High School. Most likely usually utilizing their gymnasiums if they're available.
And to clarify, the 15th, I believe is the first day of practices in Torrington. And so that's usually the fall sports evening. Is that true this year for Torrington as well?
I do not know, it was not on the calendar, but that is the varsity sports practices for all the district on their start. So I don't know if that would be the case.
Okay, thank you.
We can check on that to make sure there wouldn't be any other conflicts.
Okay.
Well, I would recommend us staying within the 8th, 10th, and 11th. If state fair is on that week, we've got parents getting ready for state fair. And so I would suggest staying in the 8th, 10th, and 11th.
I believe those days would probably work. Like without looking at a calendar, I think those later dates are probably more.
So we'll aim for those, see who'd be able to make those meetings, and time, 6 o'clock, 6:30, what works best for board members? What are your thoughts on community members? What works best for them?
I comes to 6:30, and 6:30 plus an hour and a half. It'd be done by 8. Some people, if they get off work at 5:30, to be able to get, 2 Southeast or 2 Lingle or 2 Torrington, vice versa, that can be pushing it.
We'll go with 6:30. Sounds good.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other topics for discussion this evening? So I think there's been a couple of discussion topics just from members of the community, and it was made again this evening around voice votes versus roll call votes, et cetera. As a reminder, if you look at Robert's Rules for Small Groups and our actual governing document, our governing document says that we loosely follow Robert's Rules. And so we do adhere to that practice, and the majority of our items are pretty easy to decide, and those that are not, we'll call roll call like we did this evening. And so I appreciate the input there. Future meetings. The next regular board meeting will be held on Tuesday the 9th at 7 p.m. And the annual back to service school in service for district staff will be Tuesday, August 16th at 8 a.m. in the THS gym. Is there also the barbecue?
Yes.
That we serve at these?
So You will not be, board members will not be involved in serving, but are certainly willing and encouraged to participate. We are having food trucks come in, various food trucks from around the area to participate with our staff and give them a unique opportunity to kind of have lunch and get an opportunity to kind of mix with each other as we kind of prepare for the school year. So a little different take this year.
Thank you. And then on to your report.
So in addition, a couple of things that are not written there, we would request that we take a look at August 2nd for a special meeting. In looking at and approving, this would be a 1 or 2 item agenda. This would be a 2 agenda item. One for the award of constructing of the ag building at Southeast and the final demolition of that building. So demolition, of course, will take place first and then construction following that. Our architect that we worked with is able to get that in place and get those bids open on August 2nd. And so we want to take that opportunity as soon as possible, get those approved. So that would be looking at probably less than half-hour meeting that evening. And if we could just get enough to have that vote for that evening. I know that might be some conflicts with us, other activities and things, but please feel free to participate in that. And I'll have Maureen send out an invitation for that. Is there a preference on time for a short meeting like that? To have it earlier or same time? Is there a preference?
What time will you open bids, Steve?
We will have bids opened at noon, I believe, or he'll have it completed. So go ahead.
First off, I want to just clarify one item.
Go for it.
We've spent a lot of time on this the last couple of days. The second bid packet is just for the purchase of the exterior metal and framing. So there will be a later one probably in September for the actual construction. But the intent is for this to be in Friday's paper and to have a 2-week turnaround time that we would actually be opening bids on the 28th. And so we've asked them to the architect from the 28th to the 2nd at noon, being able to decision the bid responses and get us a recommendation. So anytime after noon, we should be fine.
Also, in addition to that, our group that is in charge of cleaning has already started that process and has been working diligently on getting that to the point of any recovery of items that we can have completed for there. And appreciate everybody's work and Marcy's work on that. I know we've been trying to push a lot on people to do some things and within the time period that we have expectations of, and that's been challenging to say the least. Is there a time on that August 2nd? We would have to have an alternative location because it does sound like we have the evening, we have an event occurring within this room.
And I don't know exactly where they're going to schedule this at yet, but it's 6 o'clock. TMS and THS, the student groups and part of Sources of Strength, have scheduled something to occur at the same time as National Night Out. And that starts at 6, so that could be an outdoor thing too.
If I may, that's going to be at the, I believe it's Jordan Park. So it's going to be on campus.
Would there be objection to doing a 5:30 meeting and allowing any trustees who would like to do Zoom attendance so we can participate in those other activities that evening?
5:30. Thank you very much. Also, I would add on to Chairman Miller's discussion regarding roll call. At any time, as per Robert's rules, any trustee can ask for a roll call vote pertaining to the item if there is a request for that, just for clarification. So on staffing and in-district transfers, I'm going to bring up where we are at right now. screen. We have had some recent resignations that will impact how we are kind of staffed. One of the biggest things is we do have an opening for the district OG trainer. That has been open. That is not one that is necessarily a classroom teacher. And so that has not been set as one of the primary needs. The ones that are set as having students face-to-face open as in line 42 here. There is a need for a THS family consumer science position. Lincoln, there is also Lincoln second grade opening that is having interviews taking place. And hopefully we'll have that position filled shortly. And then the other 53 and 54, LaGrange principal quarter time and Southeast 80/dean of students with teaching duties is also open, and those will be closed. The 53 and 54 will close on Friday with interviews taking place next week to have those filled. So we are have a smaller number than we certainly have had before, but there are some important positions that still need to be filled. We also do have a recent opening that was not on this agenda, but a resignation of the ag teacher for lingo and THS, as we had a hire and an opportunity for that person to take a position as rodeo coach in the EWC. And so we definitely understand that that decision to move towards that, but that leaves us with another position that we're working on currently and have been advertising since last Friday. In addition to that, I would also always welcome anyone, if they see any questions or have any questions related to anything on the agenda or anything related to past agendas or items, feel free to contact our office and we can certainly answer any questions you may have at any time. I also want to point out that Marcy Cates and I had the opportunity to meet with our new president of EWC, Dr. Jeffrey Hawes, and we had a great conversation with him this morning about our current opportunities that we already provide and share with them, and looking at some other expanded opportunities that we can also participate in. He's a very energetic individual. We're very fortunate to have him in our community, I feel, and I think we will have a lot of support from him, as there are some very similar ideas relating to how K through 12 and post-secondary opportunities relate with each other, and how we can best formulate that agreement and those agreements in the future to even share further for the betterment of our students and their post-high school plans and how we can have positive impacts on that. So it was a very beneficial meeting, and we'll have some more updates as we get a chance to kind of formulate some more ideas and some better things that will be coming for partnerships in the future.
Thank you. Any other business for the board this evening? Meeting will be adjourned.